of these town hall events is to educate and build awareness, and you become more familiar, and the community, the Jewish community, become more familiar with both yourself and the role of the district attorney in the community. As some brief background, District Attorney Eric Gonzalez is born and bred in Brooklyn. He grew up in East New York and Williamsburg. He lives just a mile away from where he grew up. He has 3 sons. He has spent his entire life in the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office. He attended Brooklyn Law School. He was a prosecutor. He served in the Homicide Division and a full range of different trial bureaus within the District Attorney's Office. He was promoted to the District Attorney in March of 14. He was instrumental in the transition of the office from the untimely passing of the prior District Attorney, Ken Thompson. And the District Attorney has initiated a number of trailblazing programs which have really gained national attention throughout his tenure as District Attorney. To start off, if you could tell us a little bit, in your words, what is the role of the DA? A brief background of your experience, your childhood, what made you want to choose becoming a district attorney rather than follow a career path in law that many attorneys take following law school.
All right, sure. So Gil, thank you. First and foremost, thank you for the invitation to come on. It's an honor and a privilege to be able to talk about important issues facing us currently in our city. I became district attorney in 2016. I was appointed to the position after the passing of Kenneth Thompson, who was the district attorney. But before him, I was the chief assistant district attorney, which meant that I was in charge of the day-to-day operations of the office. And as you've said, I've been in this office for a long time. I know it very well. And the role of the district attorney is very crucial to public safety. My job as DA is to make sure that the people of my county, of Brooklyn, Kings County, as the cases come through the court system, are treated with respect and dignity, that we focus on public safety, and that the work that I do in my office is meant to help promote public trust in our justice system. So day to day, what that looks like is, we prosecute the cases that come to court. After the police department makes an arrest, we determine what charges are applicable, and we speak with victims about their cases, and we move forward on cases in court. And I think, so all of your members know that the DA is in charge of public safety, but we also have another role, which is to promote trust in our justice system, to make sure that what we call justice is actually happening on cases. And I can tell you that when I ran for DA, I went from community to community. Brooklyn is beautiful and diverse, and people come from all over the world, different races and ethnicities and religions. And we were having a lot of problems. People felt like the justice system did not work for them when they were a victim of a crime, for example, hate crimes, or when they were accused of a crime, that the system was out to punish them, to go after them, to treat them unfairly. And so a lot of what I do as DA is to make sure that all communities feel like they have access to the judicial system, and that they're going to get a fair shake when their cases come before this DA's office, whether it as a victim or as an accused person. And Gil, I know you also asked a little bit about my background. It's an unusual background, I would say. My family is from Puerto Rico. I was born here in Brooklyn. My parents were involved in the garment industry, working in factories. In fact, my mother worked in a sweatshop in Lower East Side for many years. So we grew up, sort of in that industry, in the garment industry. And as a young child, I learned to sew. I used to, family was pretty poor. So we used to make items, and we got paid per piece that we sewed. And so as a young child, I was involved in doing that. Unfortunately, my parents separated, and I went from Williamsburg to East New York, Brooklyn. And that really opened my eyes to the problems that we were having in the city in the 80s and 90s. I went to a neighborhood that was very dangerous, very violent, a neighborhood that had a lot of crime, gangs, drugs, but there were a lot of good people there. Those good people were surrounded and felt trapped by the violence around them. And I made the decision, I think when I was in high school, that I would try to become a lawyer. It was ambitious because no one in my family had ever gone to college. But I got there. I was able, I went to John Dewey High School in the Gravesend, Coney Island section, and they prepared me, got me into college. I got into law school, and I decided that I was going to try to make a difference in terms of public safety, that I believed, having come out of East New York and having seen the need for public safety and order and fairness, that I was well suited to do the job as DA. And ultimately, that job is about balance and judgment, making sure that when we move as government and we're pursuing charges against a person, that we have the right balance of what's fair and just in each individual case. But as DA, I never take my eyes off my life experience, having grown up in a neighborhood that had suffered from a lot of violence, and all the good families that had been suffering through that violence and through that lack of safety. And I witnessed it and experienced it firsthand in my own life in many, many occasions, the sense of not feeling safe in my own neighborhood. And so as DA, I'm really committed to making sure that the people of Brooklyn don't have to go through those experiences again, like we did in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, thank you. Using your recent comments and the references, as you know, there's a lot of media coverage about the spike in gun violence of late, and different, general sense of fear. Some, onto the extremes, feel that we're returning back to those. I don't agree with that, but I think there's a sense that there's definitely an increase in crime and shootings, and how as DA, what is your role, and how do you help keep Brooklynites specifically, and New Yorkers in general, safe?
Yeah, the uptick in crime and in terms of violence is disheartening, and I understand when people are fearful, especially long-term residents who remember what it was like back then in the 80s and 90s. Now, we're a long way away from the 80s and 90s. And quite frankly, in terms of public safety, most neighborhoods in Brooklyn continue to be very safe. General crime is down tremendously in the county. I know that's counter to what people believe and feel, but robberies and burglaries and assaultive behavior is actually down this year. It was down last year too. Index crimes were down last year, but we have seen a surge in gun violence. And we also, in 18 and 19, we saw increases in anti-Semitism in the county and really through the United States. So there's good reasons for why people should feel insecure. I actually think public safety is the biggest issue we're facing right now, in spite of the fact that a lot of crime is down, because we can't have a full and complete recovery after COVID if people don't feel safe and people don't feel that they can start businesses and do the things that they need to do, send their kids to school without fear. We know that the biggest problem that we have are these guns on our streets. We have way too many guns on our streets. The police make arrests every day for illegal possession of firearms. And there are about 6 or 7 precincts in Brooklyn that have seen a real surge in gun violence. Now, the average person in Brooklyn who does not live in one of those precincts, we're not seeing gun violence all around. But the problem with gun violence is that when it happens, like it happened in Manhattan, yes, yesterday or the day before yesterday as well, that you could feel like you could be at the wrong place at the right time and be victimized. So we have to deal with this gun violence. We have to make sure we reduce the number of guns on the streets, and we have to work on trafficking. These guns are coming down from down south, and no gun manufacturers. You all know that in New York City or New York State, these are all guns being illegally imported into the state from down south. And we have to solve cases. And the reason why I say that is because when there's a shooting, one shooting begets multiple shootings. These shootings tend to happen between gang members. And if one gang member shoots at or shoots another gang member from a rival gang, you can be rest assured that the rival gang is going to retaliate, and there's a cycle of retribution and retaliatory shooting. So what we saw, just to be clear and put some perspective on it, is the beginning of 2021, this January, for example, the first 3 murders in Brooklyn were all people who were shot, who were the main suspects in shootings at the end of 2020. And so unless the police are able to identify, arrest, and apprehend the potential shooters in these cases, we're going to see a retaliatory shooting in relationship. Last week, I was able to announce the indictment of 18 gang members from central Brooklyn that were responsible for at least 4 homicides and 13 non-fatal shootings, including the murder and the of 1-year-old DeVell Gardner Jr. in Bedford-Stuyvesant. And so these cases make a difference in terms of bringing down violence. When you take the most prolific, most violent people off the streets, we're all better off. But quite frankly, we have to deal directly with the presence of many guns and the sort of impunity by which people shoot. The solve rates in a lot of our shootings in the most difficult precincts in Brooklyn are very low, and we have to work with our communities way better to get those community members to give up the people who are shooting in our communities. Very rarely are the police completely stumped by who did it, but we often need witnesses to come forward, and we have not had a lot of success in getting witnesses to come forward.
Well, thank you for giving us a detailed explanation and reassuring people, because I tend to agree. I think that the media definitely blames some of the hype and the fear. And pivoting to a similar topic regarding crime, and you alluded to it in your comment regarding the hate crimes. As you know, recently there was the attacks in Riverdale. The Asian community is seeing a huge spike in attacks, which I think the Jewish community can definitely, unfortunately, empathize with. How do you see the current situation of hate crimes in general in the city, anti-Semitic crimes in the city, and more specifically in Brooklyn?
Okay, so this is an important question, and it deserves a complete answer. Hate crimes really started to go up in New York City at the end of 17 into 18, and really did not get the attention it deserved until the end of 18 into the beginning of 19. So this has been an ongoing issue in terms of hate in this city. Listen, Brooklyn is the home to the largest Jewish population outside of Israel. And so when people want to commit an anti-Semitic crime, often it's going to happen right here in Brooklyn because we're the home of the largest community. We have to make sure that every single one of these cases gets reported. And I think the community did a really good job at the end of 18 and into 19 to make sure that we understood every case that was happening, so that we could put resources and we could stop it. Hate crimes are despicable. They cause fear in an entire community, and we have to make sure that they're never given any passivity in the terms of how we handle it. They need to be dealt with, immediately. And I think what we have seen here in Brooklyn, and I think it's fair to say this is all of New York City, is we're not seeing extremist groups committing these hate crimes, right? We know that there are white supremacists that are out there in this country, and they're doing terrible things. But what we've seen in the county are more localized, crimes not being committed by white supremacists. Not that that's not an issue, and it's not something that extremism is something that should not be dealt with. It should be, but on the ground here in Brooklyn, that's not what the driver of hate is. What I'm seeing in Brooklyn is a few things. One is the inability of this city to deal with people with mental illness. I would say that at least 50 to 60% of the people who commit crimes of hate, whether they be anti-Semitic or anti-Asian or anti-LGBTQ, are people who have long and troubled mental health histories. There's not even a question about it. The overwhelming majority of the people that come into this office who have committed a hate crime are people who have a mental health history. The second major component of that is the people who commit property crimes. Those tend to be younger people who I think often think it's funny and don't realize the harm that they're causing by drawing a SWAT sticker or doing something, putting some graffiti somewhere. They don't know what they do in the terms of the amount of damage and harm that they're causing by their actions. And I think there's ways of dealing with them. And then we get that small portion of perpetrators who are actually know exactly what they're doing, and they do it because they're hateful. And we know what to do with them. We know that they need to be prosecuted and be sent to jail. But in terms of the mental health component, folks, which I think is the largest, as a city, we need to figure out what we're doing with them, because those are your random attacks on the subway. Those are the people who are shoving people onto the tracks. Those are the people who attack someone for no reason, don't say anything, and just keep moving. It is a tremendous problem. The second major problem, besides mental health, is our inability, when we do find these people, for our judges to use discretion and when or not to be able to incapacitate them and set bail on these folks. Most of these cases, unless it's an assaultive behavior type case, it's not eligible to be held. And so if you're dealing with someone with a mental health issue, and you're trying to get them help or treatment or therapy, you have to make sure they're coming back to court. And unfortunately, we're not seeing that. We're seeing that people who get charged with these cases often don't return back to court, and there's nothing that the judge can do, quite frankly, because all discretion has been taken away from judges. And we need judges to be able to have discretion in how to deal with the most dangerous folks in our community. That's what you saw happen in Riverdale. You had someone who lives in that community who had repeatedly, attacked, the yeshivas, and a judge couldn't do anything. And so the community is rightfully upset because you don't know if he's going to attack again. And so these are big problems that deserve, solutions that I think only can be done if there's the will to change the law and to allow for judges to exercise some discretion on how to best handle these cases.
So regarding, I know you touched on the issue of the bail reform, and that's been, again, a hot topic in the community and in the media. What would you, as a DA, recommend if you could sort of had the ear of the legislator, politics aside? What would you like to see some of the changes in the bail reform laws, or like some of that discretion that would help the judges?
I think when I said the DA's job is about public safety and exercising good judgment, we should allow the judges the same authority. The judges have to have the discretion to make individualized decisions. And so I think and I believe that bail reform was necessary. there was a lot wrong with the current bail laws, and it gets a convoluted conversation if you conflate someone who commits violent crime with someone who's being held in on a $200 bail, and we can get lost in the sauce. Bail reform was needed, but the way it was done with a broad brush, and what it needed much more was a scalpel to decide this. And so, in terms of the current system, hate crime should be bail eligible. End of conversation. Bail should be allowed in hate crimes. Now, I believe that you could get rid of the entire cash bail system, like they've done in New Jersey, and they can keep people safe in New Jersey. But in order to do that, you have to be able to hold in dangerous people, the detention side. And so when we talk about discretion, let's be clear what we mean by that. We mean that a judge, based on guidelines and rules and following the rule of law, on certain cases would be able to detain and put in jail, pending trial, a dangerous person. New York State does not allow the judges to do that. And so the only thing a judge can do in lieu of that is set bail. And so that's what's happening. You're having judges set bail in order to keep people in, and that's not what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to set bail in order to return people to court, and they're supposed to detain people who are, who meet certain criteria. If we change the law in New York State, I think you could get rid of bail so that no one needs to pay cash bail, but individual determinations could be made about who should be out and who needs to be kept in jail pending the pendency of the case. And there could be a lot of safeguards put in place to prevent abuse. So that's one way of going. I don't know there's the political will to do that. And I can tell you that a lot of people are against giving judges that kind of discretion and power. So then the second piece is, let's just work with what we have. And currently we have a bail system. So if we're going to have a bail system, hate crimes have to be bail eligible.
Well, thank you. And regarding, you also touched on the gun violence. Where do you think, or do you have any suggestions that in how we can reform some of the attacks on gun violence? Like, as you know, that these guns are all coming from out of town. Like, how do you think the city or the police can better enforce or try to stop some of the gun violence?
We need help. We need help from our federal partners, but we can do it. First of all, most of these guns that are used in crimes, when they're traced back, and so 70% of the guns in New York City are traced back to one of 4 or 5 states: North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, sometimes Pennsylvania, often Georgia. So we know where these guns are coming from. You could trace them back, you can follow them, you can see who had them, and you'll see straw purchasers. There needs to be consequences for the people who buy those guns down south and then are illegally shipping them and selling them to mostly gang members here in New York City. And you can track this pretty easily. A lot of these folks are buying multiple guns a week or a month, and they no longer have the guns in their possession. And so they're straw purchasers. It's against the law. It should be done. And so you build partnerships with the ATF, you build partnerships with the DEA, and you build partnerships with local prosecutors and police officers down there. This office in Brooklyn has done this in the past, where we've gone down to Virginia and we've gone to the Carolinas, and we've locked up straw purchasers and dragged them back to Brooklyn and put them on Rikers Island for selling these guns. So illegal gun trafficking is a major component. If you want to get a reduction in gun violence, you're going to have to make guns harder to get, and they're very easy to get right now. The other thing is, I've worked with the Attorney General, and I've worked with others to do voluntary gun buybacks to get rid of some of the guns that are in people's homes, and we've given them, gift cards and some money in order to get guns off out of the hands of people. Guns are the number one purveyor of death in the city, not only in shootings, but in suicides. And we've had a number of cases in the last several months where a child finds a gun in a relative's house, plays with the gun, and winds up shooting themselves or someone else by accident. So voluntary gun buybacks are another component of getting guns off the streets. And so we want to reduce that gun violence. The second piece to this, and I mentioned it earlier, Gil, is we have to solve these cases. When someone is using a gun in the commission of a crime, it's very important that they be brought to justice, that they get apprehended, and they get arrested. And we need to do more to make sure that that happens. And so figuring out how to convince witnesses to come forward. People are afraid. People are afraid of retaliation. People are afraid that if they come forward, their information is going to be given out to the defense attorneys and that they're going to be vulnerable or exposed and that them or their family members are going to be victimized. And this is particularly true in the communities that have to deal with this gun violence. And so we have to figure out ways of making sure we protect eyewitnesses and people who are willing to come forward as witnesses from the fear of retaliation. I'll be honest, retaliation is very rare in these cases. Very rarely does a witness or a victim ever get attacked or ever really get threatened, but people are rightfully afraid that if they call 911, if they report the crime, if they say they know who did it, that they're going to be subjected to reprisals. And so we have to figure out as a city our commitment to protecting witnesses of crime.
Thank you. I'm changing to a different role of your office. I've read often about the wrongful conviction unit that you have, and that's something that really was very touching to me. You know that, and you know I was very impressed by it. If you could, give people, I don't think many people realize that. I think they associate the district attorney's office of just dealing with crime and criminals, and I think there's a whole, like you said, public safety and justice, and there's a flip side to that justice of freeing the people and bringing justice to those who were wrongfully convicted. If you can, give our viewers a little bit more background on what you've done and the accomplishments your office has achieved in that regard.
Yeah, thank you for the question. One of the things that has been among the most rewarding things in my career is in 2014, I was asked by the district attorney at that time to help establish a conviction review unit. We had never really had a unit that was completely dedicated to doing this work in Brooklyn. And so we established the first conviction review unit here in Brooklyn in 2014. I was an integral part of organizing that and figuring out how do we take a look at all these claims of wrongful convictions. And first, let me just tell your audience that, yes, the criminal justice system does get it wrong sometimes. Almost every profession, whether it be doctors or air pilots at airplanes or people who operate equipment, there is human error in every profession, and you want that to be a very minimal amount of error in any profession. But there are mistakes made in all professions. It's true, and it happens in the courthouse as well. And so there are 2.2 million people in jail. Even if we got it right 98% of the time, there would still be a lot of people who have been wrongfully convicted. And so this office takes a look at two types of wrongful convictions. We take a look at wrongful convictions where a truly innocent person has been wrongfully convicted. And unfortunately, it does happen. And we also will take a look at a wrongful conviction where the process, the trial, was so devoid of fairness and there were so many errors in the trial that it's hard to tell whether or not the person is actually innocent or not, but that the trial was held in unconstitutional ways. And unfortunately, that's happened as well. It's been particularly meaningful, having worked directly on some of these cases, to realize that over the past 35 years, there have been a number of people that were wrongfully convicted here in Brooklyn. In July of 2020, working with the Innocence Project and a big law firm, Wilmer Hill, my office published a report called 426 Years, and we looked at 25 wrongful conviction. We called it 426 years because that's the amount of collective time these 25 individuals spent in prison for something that was wrongful. 24 of them were men, 1 woman, and 24 of them were either Black or Hispanic, and there was 1 white person. We looked at these cases very carefully, and we saw that tremendous miscarriages of justice had happened. And I think, when we talk about criminal justice reform, whether you're conservative or in the middle or a liberal, we can all agree that incarcerating someone wrongfully does not do anyone any good. It's immoral. It doesn't keep us safer. In fact, it makes it worse for us because we have the innocent person in jail and the guilty person out to continue to terrorize and commit more crime. And so we've looked at these cases, and I've had the ability to work on some of these cases, Gil, and it's been heartbreaking to see the errors. So what happened? Why did these errors happen? Well, we learned a lot about wrongful convictions, and quite frankly, we learned what the root causes of these are: wrongful identifications. There is a concept of people make mistakes when they identify people. We've also learned about wrongful science, that some of the science that we believed, did not work the way we thought it worked 30 years ago. And we also learned about false confessions and other things. So the ADAs in my office are being trained so we never make these mistakes again. And I think it's important that as the district attorney, I acknowledge that we've made mistakes and that we vacate these wrongful convictions. We give these people their good name back. Of those cases I told you about in the 426-year report, out of the 25 people, 3 of them never got out of prison. They died in prison. And so we had to vacate their convictions, with their family members present in the courtroom, but they actually died in prison. And so the human cost involved in wrongful convictions is tremendous, and we should all be applauding the work to get innocent people out of prison. It's not inconsistent with safety. It's not inconsistent with this, search for justice. In fact, it is one of the most noble things we can do is to make sure that no innocent people languish in prison.
Well, thank you. Another area of your office that I think most people, I was not aware. I know when I was in your office one time regarding with a number of friends donating PPE, and you and your staff related how, I learned there was a much greater aspect to the criminal justice system in your office, how you sort of deal with children from abused homes or children neglected homes or children, there might have been a crime in a house, either the parents or the guardians were the criminals or the victims, and you deal with a whole range of other issues than just the actual criminal or victim, that there's a whole other population that your office has to deal with, from children to abused spouses to people who have fear of reporting crimes. If you could share some of that human element that your office deals with. I know myself growing up, I always thought the DA just basically was an extension of the police, of they arrest the bad guys and you basically lock them up. And I think there's a lot more to it.
Let me start off, Gil, by saying I want to thank the community for helping me, because during the pandemic, when most of city government closed down, the DA's office never closed down. We were here every day. Now, I allowed some of my workers to be at home and work virtually, but myself and the executive team and many of the ADAs were here each and every day. In fact, we were here 7 days a week because we had limited personnel here. We wanted to make sure that the community knew that their cases were not being neglected and that we were going to do this. But I also needed to pivot in terms of public safety. I wanted to make sure that during this, beginning of COVID, that this office, and we got donations, that the office would be able to assist people, that the people in the community of Brooklyn knew that the DAs cared. And so we went to not nursing homes, but senior centers. We went to New York City Housing Authority buildings and other places that had, people in extreme need and especially vulnerable senior populations. And we made sure that they got, really good masks, not just a paper mask, but really good masks. We made sure that they got hand sanitizer and latex gloves, and that we were educating them and talking about the dangers of COVID. And I'm talking about in the very beginning. I'm very proud of the fact that this office really tried to increase public safety by doing education and doing pandemic relief. We also have hosted more than 46 food drives throughout Brooklyn and vulnerable communities where we gave people food, including hot food, but also food to take back to their apartments, canned and box food, so that people who, especially our seniors and vulnerable populations, didn't need to leave the house during the pandemic, going to the supermarkets where there was, people were actually getting sick, leaving their houses during the early days of the pandemic. So we did a lot to make the community know that the prosecutors and staff who work in the Brooklyn DA's office actually care about community. And it allowed me to really, as the DA, focus my efforts on what I believe is one of the core functions of the DA's office, and that's service. Yeah, we're responsible for public safety and making sure that the cases proceed forward in the court in the right way, but just serving the community, letting the community know that we're here as a resource to it. So we were able to do all of that during the pandemic. We saw that child abuse and domestic violence had increased during COVID because everyone was trapped in the apartments and houses together. And so we were seeing that there was more abuse, domestic violence and child abuse, but less ability to report. And we saw a real increase, not only in domestic violence, but we saw a really big increase in senior elder abuse cases where parents had taken in their grandkids or their nephew or, or their own child or grandchild, and they were now being victimized by the people that they were helping. And often these folks had mental health issues. And so we did a lot. We sent out social workers and we were doing home visits, and we were just trying to make sure that we were letting people know that we were here to help them. And so there was less action in the courthouse because the courts were closed, but the ADAs and the paralegals and our counselors and stuff were doing home visits and doing others to make sure that really vulnerable groups were not being left at the mercy. We are now seeing the other side of that. Last year, domestic violence calls and calls of child abuse dropped by like 15-20% across the city. And now as we're coming out of the pandemic, we're seeing that those numbers are rising. So now that people are able to leave their homes and people are able now to safely report, because they weren't able to report it when the abuser was next to them in the apartment, now we're starting to see that, all of the problems that were happening during the pandemic. And so we work as carefully as we can with different partners, especially some of our partners in the Jewish community. I don't want to say names and forget others, but OHEL and JASA and JCRC and a number of other JCCs and a number of other organizations to make sure that when people were suffering and needed help, that there was an ability to get to the office, and the office was able to help them even while a lot of our court systems were closed. We were able to get orders of protection. So we did a lot during the pandemic that I think I'm very proud of. But now that the court systems are opening and everything, we should be able to start to push a lot of these cases in the courtroom so we can resolve them. One of the big dilemmas that have come out of the pandemic is not only there's more shootings that we've touched upon, but our court system has a tremendous backlog of cases. And it's going to take a lot of hard work for us to get through this pandemic backlog. And we're working on that right now. We're working to make sure that people can get their cases heard in the courtroom, both as victims and as accused.
Thank you. So what are some of your plans specifically for your office as far as post-pandemic, and how can the DA help the city itself come back, in terms of business, employees, just the general environment to help recover from the pandemic?
Okay. So our ADAs are back. We're back at work. One of the things that I think is very important for the people of Brooklyn is to have healthy, vibrant communities. Quite frankly, our neighborhoods, especially the neighborhoods that are particularly safe, are safe because the neighborhoods have a vibrant, thriving community around it. And that looks like, small mom and pop stores, that looks like, good schools, and that looks like people feeling free to come out and walk around and spend money, not being in fear of crime. And so in terms of what we need to do is we need to put in the environment back into Brooklyn where people feel that it's safe. Summer is coming. It's safe to come out with your children. It's safe to go out and get some ice cream. It's safe to do the things you need to do. And as we start to get more people involved in living their lives the way we were before the pandemic, we're going to start to see thriving economies locally, and people will have employment and business. And I think that we're going to start to see less crime. When the streets are empty, when stores are boarded up, that allows certain criminal elements to take advantage. And when we're out and about and occupying our neighborhoods and our businesses are open and our kids are back at school full time, we're going to see our neighborhood start to return back to a sense of normalcy. And I think that's an important piece. But as DA, listen, it's my job to make sure that I'm dealing with the problems that we have in our communities. And I don't accept the fact that, as we are opening, that when there are community problems, community complaints, quality of life issues, I don't accept the fact that there's nothing for law enforcement to do. There's a lot of ways for law enforcement to help neighborhoods deal with their quality of life concerns. And so they should be reported to my office, and that we will work with the appropriate authorities. Sometimes that'll be the police department, and sometimes that'll be other organizations. But we should never accept the fact that things are going to go downhill, and we just have to accept it. And I think that's an important role that this office can play. And so if there's problems with people selling drugs or hanging out in the corner and drinking, let us know, and we will make sure that we focus our attention on it and bring in other organizations who have to deal with this. And so that's just so important in terms of living in a safe community, that when there are community complaints and problems, that there's actually someone who's interested in helping to solve those problems.
Thank you. I guess before we're getting close to wrapping up, I just had one question. I know I've spoken to David and he's mentioned it. What would you suggest, or maybe there are some parents listening, or maybe some younger people who might want to consider this career option as you did? How would someone get involved, or what are some of the different career options in the DA's office? I'm sure not everyone at the office is an attorney,
right,
that, or just a clerk, that there are a variety, like you mentioned, the social work or a lot of the community outreach. So just to pivot to that human factor of the DA's office.
Well, we're a big office. We have about 1,200 employees. We have over 500 lawyers. And so that means more than half of the office are not lawyers. And like any other law firm, at the end of the day, the DA's office is like a large law firm focused on public safety. We have people who perform all kind of functions for us. We have accountants, and we have people who do computers and graphics and human resources and community relations and counseling services. And each and every day, they're public notices of when we want to hire people, and so people can apply for it. And I think it's very important, and I am a big believer that this office has to reflect the diversity of the county. I often talk in terms of providing services to victims of crime, that has to be done in culturally competent ways, so trauma-informed care, but done in culturally competent ways. So how do we do that? Well, we do that by making sure every community is represented on the staff in this office, and that we speak a lot of different languages, and we have people who come from all walks of life. And I am very proud of the work that I've done in hiring a very diverse workforce. And that, again, it's great when you're a lawyer. And if you're someone in the community who's a lawyer and you come from Brooklyn, I'm going to pay attention to you because I'm looking for lawyers like that. But I'm also looking for community members who want to do other jobs in the DA's office. And it's important that this diversity extends to not just the lawyers, but to the non-legal staff. And so I encourage everyone to apply. We hire without any kind of, bias or racial discrimination. If you're qualified, likelihood you're going to get an interview and explain to me your commitment to justice, because whether or not you are here, just making photocopies, I'm looking for people who care very much about justice and making their neighborhoods better. And so if you're a person who cares about your community and think, I need to get paid, I need to have a job, you might as well do it in an organization that's focused on making your neighborhood safer and fairer.
Thank you. And then, I guess we're going to wrap up now. If you could, any closing remarks you'd like to share, and just to touch on also why this election. Obviously, one of the reasons, it's important having this discussion now is a lot of people are focused on the mayor's race, as that's getting all the prime attention. But, people have to, I don't know if they're all aware that you're up for re-election as well, coming up on June 22nd. Early voting starts before that. And, why is this election important? Why do people need to vote? And your thoughts on the future of the city and your office and just in general election cycle.
Yeah, so this is an important time for the city. We're getting past the pandemic. We're at an intersection where, there's real fear, there's real concerns about whether or not people will continue to want to live in our city, or that people are going to leave. There are people concerned about all kinds of, social issues in the city. But among, one of the biggest issues is the sense of public safety. And are we moving, trending in the right direction, the wrong direction? 4 years ago, I was fortunate enough to get elected the district attorney of Brooklyn. And today I come in, a lot more wiser, a lot more experienced in figuring out how to keep people safe. I should say that prior to this past year, when we saw this increase in gun violence, for 3 years in a row, I was leading a borough that saw gun violence going down in tremendous ways. We were down a full third, 1/3 fewer people killed on the streets of Brooklyn than years ago, just a few years ago, and 40% fewer shootings than a few years ago. And so we were moving in the right direction. Now we have a spike and a surge in this violence, and we need to make sure that the leader has his eyes or her eyes on this particular issue so that we can all go back. But like I said, in most communities in Brooklyn, you're not going to be dealing with significant gun violence. There are really about 6 or 7 precincts that have to really focus on this issue. And there are other issues in every community. And I think as DA, been able to focus in on what issues are in each neighborhood. And so that's an important fact, knowing that I'm present, that my team is present, and that we're proximate to the community that we serve, that we're going to be there. I'm not going to run away when things got bad. In fact, when we saw the increase in hate crimes in the Jewish community in particular in 18 and 19, I was there for the whole time and figured out part of those solutions. And I'm proud to tell you that it's down nearly 50% in Brooklyn from 19 to today. And we're going to continue to fight that. And we're going to we're going to beat gun violence. I have a plan about how to do gun violence, and I'm waiting for the next mayor to come in, and so we can work together and figure out exactly how we beat not only hate crimes but gun violence. We can't continue in the direction we're going, and it's an important election. I ask for people to go out, pull my lever, bubble my name in November, when I'm up for re-election, so that we can get back to the good work of making sure Brooklyn is the safe place that we all want it to be, and the place that we want to continue to raise our families. I'm committed. I'm vested. I have skin in the game. I'm raising my 3 boys right here in Brooklyn, and I want them to live in a safe neighborhood.
Thank you very much. I know we're coming towards the end. I don't know if there's anything else you would like to add. Otherwise, I thank you very, very much for taking the time. I know you have a very busy schedule. I found this extremely informative in a lot of the insights. And again, I'd like to open it up if you have anything else to further add before we conclude.
I just want to say thank you, and I want to say thank you to all of the members of the community who work in conjunction with my office and with me in dealing with the day-to-day issues that every community has. I'm very committed to solving individual neighborhood concerns, and the only way we can do that is by working together. And so continue to reach out, continue to let me know what's happening in your neighborhood so that we can try to make it the type of community that we deserve. And I believe, as DA, 2 things. I believe that we're going to get past this violence, and that we all deserve to live in a safe neighborhood, and we all deserve to have fairness in our justice system. And as DA, I've labored not only to make our communities as safe as possible, but to make sure that every community feels like they can get justice in the criminal system. And so thank you, Gil, and I look forward to talking to you again in the near future.
And I want to thank COL Live for hosting this hour and putting this together and bringing the community people of prominence and in the community to educate them and make them informed. Thank you again. And thank you again for keeping us safe.
All right. Thank you. Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.